There's only a couple of weeks left till the NHL trade deadline, which means each team is going to have to make the difficult decision of whether it's a buyer or a seller. Now, for some teams, that's an easy decision, one that's already been made for them probably months ago. But there's a lot of teams that are still just right on the cusp of contending, but are also a bad week away from falling out of the playoff hunt entirely. So today I'm going to break down whether every single team should be a buyer or a seller, and for those selling teams, which players they should be looking to move on from. And let's get the obvious ones out of the way from the buyer side. There are 12 teams right now who I would consider to be unquestioned buyers, being the Bruins, Rangers, Panthers, Hurricanes, Leafs, Canucks, Stars, Avalanche, Jets, Golden Knights, Oilers, and Kings. I don't think there's any realistic way that those teams don't make the playoffs this year, and I think that all of them have a legitimate argument for thinking that they can go on a deep run, if not win the Stanley Cup this year. And none of these teams have incredibly pressing and obvious needs. Like, yeah, you could say that the Hurricanes, Oilers, and Kings could be kicking the tires on a goaltender. Toronto, Boston, Vegas, and Colorado could all use a little help on the back end. And maybe the Jets and the Rangers could use a little bit more scoring depth, but these are largely changes around the edges. Their core group is pretty solid. They're just looking for one or two more pieces to boost their chances a little bit more. But who are they going to be trading with? Well, let's start with the obvious sellers, starting with the worst team in the league, the Chicago Blackhawks. Now, unfortunately, the Blackhawks are lacking a lot of high-end forwards and defensemen that they could move, but they do have one pretty important asset that not a lot of people are talking about, and that's in between the pipes. On the year, Mrazek is 16th in goals saved above expected per 60, which is higher than a couple of playoff teams' starting goaltenders like Alexander Georgiev, Ilya Sorokin, Andrei Vasilevsky, and even Jake Ottinger. It's also higher than John Gibson, who is also rumored to be on the market. Honestly, other than Markstrom, Mrazek might be the best goaltending option out there at the trade deadline, and there's at least 3 or 4 teams that should be looking for goaltending help, so if I was the Blackhawks and looking to acquire some more assets, he's really the only option that they have. Now, the next definite seller is the San Jose Sharks, and they actually do have a lot of higher-end talent, especially on the forward core with guys like Anthony Duclair, Mike Hoffman, Kevin Labanc, and Alexander Barabanov. Now, the problem is that Labanc and Barabanov have had really bad years, so I don't think that they're going to actually fetch as much on the trade market as they could in other years. So San Jose may not want to sell low on them, but Duclair and Hoffman should fetch somewhere between like 3rd and 4th round picks each, according to the video I did on the trade value of draft picks. So unfortunately, it's not going to be a big haul that the Sharks are getting like when they dealt Timo Meier last year, but they still have the opportunity to recoup some assets at least. Next, we have the Anaheim Ducks in the definite sellers club, and Adam Henrique and John Gibson are both being bandied about as potential trade chips, and Gibson is a pretty good option for a goaltending-hungry team, while Henrique could actually fetch a first-round pick as a middle 6 forward. But a guy that I don't think a lot of people are talking about who I would be looking to move if I was the Ducks is forward Frank Vatrano. Yeah, his production has been a very nice surprise this year with 45 points in 51 games, but he is 29, he only has a couple of years left on his contract. He would be a prime sell-high candidate if I'm the Anaheim Ducks. He could probably fetch them a first-round pick and a mid-tier prospect, or maybe even a first this year and next year if a team is really desperate. The Columbus Blue Jackets are the next team who figure to be definite sellers, and they really only have one ship that they can sell off this year, goaltender Elvis Merzlikins. And in my mind, I think a team is about to overpay for Merzlikins, but hey, if you're Columbus and some team comes calling with a first-round pick or a nice prospect that they want to trade for Merzlikins, I would do it 100%. The Phoenix Coyotes are also going to be sellers this year. Jason Zucker is the guy who most people expect to be traded at the deadline, and I'm sorry to disappoint you Coyotes fans, but he is going to fetch you maybe a 3rd-round pick at best, given his play this year. But another guy that they have on their roster who I would actually be looking to sell is defenseman Matt Dumba. He has been pretty underwhelming this year, and so you are selling a little bit low on him, but he's a UFA after this year. You're not going to re-sign him, especially not at this $3.9 million price mark that you have. Some team's going to want some bottom floor defensive depth, and Dumba can provide that. And the last of the definite sellers is the Ottawa Senators. Guys like Vlad Tarasenko and Jacob Chychrun are both going to be rumored to be on the trade block. Tarasenko, I think, definitely is gone. Chychrun, a little bit surprising, given that he's still a very young defenseman with a lot of upside who they just signed to a big contract, and you'd be selling on him pretty low right now, to be honest. Another guy who they could look to trade is the recently acquired Dominik Kubalik. His contract's about to expire. See if you can get like a 3rd or 4th round pick for the guy. And then finally, the last team who I think are for sure sellers are the Montreal Canadiens. Jake Allen is the guy most people are expecting will be on the block this year, but honestly, Montreal, he's not going to bring you back that much. Maybe a second-round pick if somebody's really desperate for a backup goaltender. Tanner Pearson is another guy who I would shop around aggressively. He's not going to get you much of anything, but he's a UFA after this year, and with 10 points in 38 games, maybe somebody's desperate enough to give him a bottom 6 slot. But if you get like a 4th or a 5th round pick offer for Pearson, I would take that and run to the bank, Montreal. Now, those are the definite sellers and the definite buyers. Let's get into the teams who are right on the cusp, still in playoff contention. Maybe it's a very big long shot, but they're still in the hunt technically. And let's evaluate whether or not they should be buyers or not. So we'll start with the next worst team in the NHL standing points-wise, being the Buffalo Sabres. And no surprise, I'm going to say that they should be sellers this year. I still think that the future is bright for Buffalo. They do have some good pieces and some young talent, guys like Thompson, Dahlin, Power. They really just didn't have the horses to keep up in the Atlantic, and they didn't have good enough goaltending, unfortunately. Now, the only player who I realistically think the Sabres should be looking to trade is defenseman Eric Johnson. Bottom pairing guy, he'll net you like a 4th or a 5th round pick. But there are rumors going around that the Sabres could be looking to shop Casey Middlestat, and first of all, don't. That would be an incredibly stupid decision by you. But if you actually are going to shop Middlestat, he is probably going to net you at least 2 first-round picks, or a first and a prospect, or a high-end prospect and maybe like a second-rounder. But I don't know why the Sabres, a very young team who's on the upswing and has a lot of good talent in their system already, would be looking to move on from an already good player to acquire more futures. That just doesn't make sense. But if you are trading Casey Middlestat, please give Washington a call because we desperately need top 6 scoring. Next up, going through the standings, we have the Minnesota Wild, who are actually over 500 and have been riding a pretty good streak ever since they fired Dean Evason. Having said that, though, the Wild are probably at best going to creep in as a wildcard spot, and I don't think that they're going to have much of a chance in the first round of the playoffs. If you want to just keep spinning the tires on first and second round exits, then by all means start to buy. But if I was you guys, I'd be looking to sell off guys like Marcus Johansson or Zach Bogosian, get a few extra picks. You'll also probably be looking to offer Fleury around for probably a 3rd round pick, somebody who needs a backup goaltender. But if the Wild want to get really crazy, why don't you offer up Matt Zuccarello and see what somebody will pay for him, because it's going to be at least a 1st round pick. And I know that that's not a popular thing to suggest to Minnesota because he did just sign an extension, but he's 36, and he's only got a couple of years left after this year. And I know 70-point guys don't grow on trees, but somebody out there is going to give you a pretty penny for him. After them, going by standing points order, is the Pittsburgh Penguins, and honestly, I think the Penguins should be buyers. They're one of the top teams in the NHL in terms of expected goal differential. They obviously have elite forwards, and they have really good defensemen, despite what everybody thinks about Letang and Carlson. They're getting elite goaltending out of Jari, and most importantly, the thing that they need, depth forwards, are in pretty abundant supply, and they don't have to trade a lot of futures and picks to get them. But I understand why the Penguins might want to sell, because they have a pretty barren prospect pool and not a lot of picks, so they might want to recoup some of that. But in all honesty, if you're trying to do right by Sid and make another run in the playoffs, I think you could absolutely do that. Next on the list are a presumed seller in the Calgary Flames, and yeah, I think there's an outside chance that the Flames could actually make a run, but in all honesty, it's very unlikely. They should be sellers. They're going to trade away Jacob Markstrom, who's probably the best goaltender that's going to be available at the trade deadline, and they'll also be trading away stud defenseman Noah Hanifin, who should fetch them at least a 1st plus a really good prospect. Chris Tanev is probably going to fetch them a 2nd round pick in the trade. But if they want to go full fire sale, just blow everything up, a couple other guys that they could look to sell off are Andrei Kuzmenko, who they just acquired in the Lindholm trade, Andrew Mangiapane, and Igor Sharangovich. Just clear out all those guys who have expiring contracts coming up, load up on picks and prospects, and just start the rebuild in full swing. You could easily come out of this trade deadline with like 4 or 5 top 50 picks. After the Flames, in the standings comes Seattle Kraken, and I think the Kraken should absolutely be buyers. Again, just a really strong team in terms of expected goal differential. They're 8th overall in the NHL. They are a good bit out of playoff spot, but honestly, if they can just get some more scoring help, and the guys who were putting goals in the net last year return to form, which is still possible with a quarter of the season left, the Kraken are in a great position to make a run. And hell, if I was the Kraken with the prospect pool that I have, take a run and see if you can get a guy like Jake Gensel, who could put you over the top. After the Kraken come the New York Islanders, who have had a boost since Patrick Waugh took over behind the bench, but they're still 5 points clear of a wildcard spot, and it might be tempting for them to buy, but honestly, I think the Islanders should be sellers. You can part ways with pending free agents like Cal Clutterbuck and Matt Martin, as well as some guys that you got on the books for another year or so, namely Kyle Palmieri. This is especially important for a team that has a pretty weak prospect pool and really needs to add some more assets. So with all those guys, you could probably get a couple of mid-round picks like second and thirds. Just above the Islanders in the standings comes the New Jersey Devils, and I think the Devils should absolutely be buyers. They are currently the 5th best team in the NHL in expected goal differential, behind only the Oilers, Panthers, Kings, and Hurricanes, aka 3 teams who are legit Stanley Cup contenders, and the Kings who are basically in the exact same position as them, which is they need a goaltender. Markstrom, Mrazek, Gibson, I don't care who it is, get one of them, and all of a sudden you're going to be a playoff team. Like, the Devils should not be in this position. It's not Lady Ruff's fault. It's not Jack Hughes' injury's fault. It is entirely because they do not have a good goaltender on their roster. And then my Capitals come in just above the Devils in the standings, and as painful as it is for me to say, I do think it's the right move for the Capitals to be sellers this year. While they are in a good position as far as the wild card goes, only 5 points out of the wild card spot with 3 games in hand on the Lightning, the underlying analytics for the Caps are just terrible. They're a bottom 5 team in expected goal differential. Even though they've been getting incredible goaltending from the Charlie Lindgren, he's a guy who I would look to maybe sell off. This team really just needs a retool. They got to clear out some of the middle 6 and bottom 6 guys who aren't doing much of anything. Guys like Anthony Mantha, who is right now a sell-high candidate, along with Nick Kubel, Joel Edmondson, maybe Nick Dowd, clear the deck a little bit and let some of the younger kids like Hendrix Lapierre, Evan Murshnishenko, and perhaps next year Ryan Leonard come up and start making the youth movement happen. The Predators are right above the Capitals, and I actually do think the Predators should be buyers. Again, 12th best in expected goal differential on the year. They're currently tied with the Blues for that last wildcard spot, and I think that honestly, the Preds are another team that just needs another pure scorer on their roster. If you could get Gensel or Kuzmenko or Frank Vetrano or hell, even Anthony Mantha, I think that would help the Predators immensely. And they're in a good enough position, I think, that they should be looking to load up and don't trade UC Saros. He may be having a down year, but that guy is still one of the best goalies in the league. Then we got the St. Louis Blues, who, as I mentioned, are clinging on to that second wildcard spot out in the West. But in all honesty, the Blues should look to be sellers this year. At 5-on-5, the Blues actually have the 3rd worst expected goal differential of any team in the NHL. The only teams that they are ahead of in that regard are the Sharks and the Blackhawks. This is a team that is honestly getting bailed out by some superb goaltending from Jordan Binnington this year, and you could move guys like Kasperi Kapanen, Sammy Blais, and Marco Scandello for pretty good returns. But if the Blues want to get really spicy, my guy who I'd be looking to move for a big haul would be Pavel Buchnevich. Again, only 2 years left on his deal, approaching 30. This is a prime guy who, if the Blues really want to commit to the rebuild, would be the most coveted or second most coveted player on the trade block along with Jake Gensel this year. Easily gets you a first round this year and next year, maybe a good prospect along with him. Next on the list, we have the Tampa Bay Lightning, who currently hold one of the 2 wildcard spots in the East. I think the Lightning are in a great position and should be buyers this year. And what they really need is help on the back end. They've gotten severe underperformance by Eric Chernak. Sergachev's injury obviously really hurts them, and they're completely leaning on Victor Hedman. They need defensive reinforcements badly. The Detroit Red Wings are the next highest team in the standings, and while it seems like it could go either way for the Red Wings at the trade deadline, in my personal opinion, they should be looking to sell. Yes, standings-wise, they are in a playoff spot right now, but from an analytics perspective, this team is a paper dragon. They have, and this is true, the worst expected goals for total of any team in the NHL. They have fewer expected goals for this year than San Jose or Chicago. This is a team that has gotten incredibly lucky to be scoring at the clip that they are, and it is just plainly not sustainable. And the thing about the Red Wings is they have a lot of assets that they could move at the deadline. Vets like Kane, Gostisbehere, and Perron all have contracts that are expiring in the next year or two, and all could be moved for a pretty decent return. Probably none of them are going to get you first rounders other than maybe Kane, but the Red Wings shouldn't lose sight of the plan. They're very close to hitting that tipping point. They just need a few more pieces, and they have the ability this year to add some futures to get those. And then the final team in the will they, won't they sell is the Philadelphia Flyers, and the Flyers are being discussed as a team that is going to obviously be selling even though they're in the playoffs, and I don't understand why that is. I know that there's a lot of people on Twitter who are saying that the Flyers should be selling off of their expiring contracts, but this is a damn good Philadelphia team that could make noise in the playoffs, and just because it's come a little bit earlier than expected doesn't mean that this team should just bow out on a chance to maybe acquire a good piece or two and go on a deep run. The Flyers actually have a ton of ammunition to make a big move with their first-round pick and a conditional first-round pick they got from Florida in that Claude Giroux trade from a couple of years ago. It's very unlikely that either of those picks are going to be in the top 15. Certainly they're not going to be in the top 10. So why not move those couple of picks and just go big game hunting? Look and see if you can get a guy. You're probably not going to get Gensel, but you could be the team that lands Buchnevich. And let's be honest, given the fact that Carter Hart is currently under investigation, he's not going to be back this year. Wouldn't you like to be a team that picks up one of those goaltenders that's on the market? The Flyers are in an incredible position to add at the deadline and really not lose a lot of their progress on the rebuild. So Danny Briere, even though I'm a division rival, be bold and go for it. And that's ultimately my message to all the GMs at the deadline. If you're a buyer or a seller, just remember, scared money don't make money.